Hey guys, welcome back to Living in Baton Rouge. Michaela Covington here. Excited to talk to you about some cool things that we have in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or Louisiana across the board. Maybe not cool, but something that most states don't have because they're not this south in the United States. But before we get into that, if you are new to this channel, we talk about everything under the sun, Louisiana, and real estate. So if you're looking to move to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or maybe have to move here for work, or you're just interested in what's going on in Baton Rouge, subscribe, hit that bell, and let's dive on in. Okay, so the title of this video is 3 myths about flood zones in Louisiana. So if you have no idea, majority of Louisiana is in a flood zone, especially in the Baton Rouge area. So what is a flood zone? People are like, what does that mean? Does it flood all the time down there? No, it doesn't. Now, some areas do, but especially the marsh, you know, it's kind of water all the time. But anyway, it does flood every now and then in certain areas, or honestly, sometimes we have these crazy flukes that it's not supposed to flood, but it floods. So let's talk about it. What does that actually mean? Will my house flood if I buy here in Baton Rouge? Let's get into it. Okay, so what is a flood zone? So based upon FEMA, flood hazard areas identified on the flood insurance rate map, okay, are identified as a special flood hazard area. And special flood hazard area are defined as the area that will be inundated by the flood event having a 1% chance of being equaled or exceeded in any given year. The 1% annual chance flood is also referred to as the base flood or 100-year flood. So what does that mean? Okay. A flood zone, what it pretty much means is there is a 1% chance that this area could flood, okay? And based upon the 100-year flood that happened 100 years ago. That's what we're basing this off of. And like FEMA does base off of a flood hazard area. So you'll have a flood hazard map. And we're going to get into that and what does that actually mean. So there are several flood zones throughout the area, but the most used and most observed when it comes to real estate in the Baton Rouge area and the surrounding areas is flood zone A, flood zone AE, and flood zone X. Okay, so that's one of the flood zones that we predominantly use. Now, what does that mean? It means flood zone A is kind of one of your most hazardous, like your hazardous flood zones. Then you have your next one down, which is flood zone AE, which is like less hazardous. And then you have flood zone X, which is like, woo, kind of in the clear, but kind of not because it's still a flood zone. So we're going to get into what the myths are, because people here in Louisiana sometimes don't even know some of these things because they've been around it for so long and they're like, they just use these different words, and in all reality, they're using the wrong words. So first myth, flood zone X is not a flood zone. Yes, it is. It's in the name, okay? If your home is in flood zone X, it is considered a flood zone. Now, what does that mean? Why do people say that it's not in a flood zone? Well, it's because if you are in flood zone X, you are technically not required to carry flood insurance if you have a mortgage on the home. Yes, if you're not from here, you're like, why wouldn't I want flood insurance? Well, some people could say, well, this area doesn't flood. It hasn't flooded in over 100 years. Yes, going back to the 100 years flood. But in all reality, some people just don't care about it. They're like, it's fine. I've lived here my entire life. I'm not worried about my house flooding. Yes. Now, technically, flood insurance is not required for flood zone X, especially for a mortgaged house. But this is what I like to tell every single person who buys here in Baton Rouge, Livingston Parish, and the surrounding areas. Get flood insurance, especially even if you're in flood zone X. Like, the reason why is because the flood premiums are very, very low for people that are in flood zone X. It's totally worth it. If we have a flash flood that happens, you're covered. Totally worth it. Trust me. And the reason I say that is because I've experienced a flood myself, and it's totally worth having the insurance. Okay? All right. Let's talk about this. Myth number 2. Just because your house is technically in a flood zone, Even if it's flood zone A, flood zone AE, or flood zone X, it does not mean it will flood, okay? It just means that you are in a potential area that might be more prone to flood because of how the water flows, how the water drains, okay? So why is this a big deal? So the reason why I'm saying this is because even if you are in flood zone X, there is not a guarantee that you're not going to flood because it's in the name. It is in a flood zone, okay? So you're probably thinking, I'm never going to buy in Louisiana or in Baton Rouge or in the surrounding areas. Let me tell you, it's okay. So I want to tell you a story, and this is particularly specific to me because this happened to me because I lived in Livingston Parish. In 2016, we had a crazy flood, and not only affected Livingston Parish, but it also flowed into East Baton Rouge Parish. And a lot of the areas that were flooded were areas that should have never flooded because they were considered flood zone X, okay? And the reason why I say so much about getting flood insurance and why it's so important is because in the flood of 2016, all these families and all these people that were in flood zone X, a lot of them didn't have flood insurance, okay? And both my parents were those people. They had two separate homes and they both got flooded, didn't have flood insurance. It was a nightmare, okay? So this is why I press, hey, please get flood insurance. It's totally worth it in the long run because you're gonna be ripping sheetrock out of your house, all these different things, and you're thinking, Michaela, I'm not buying in Baton Rouge. It's okay, it gets better. Just hold on. Okay, so that is why I always say, please buy flood insurance. I know it's a pain in the rear to pay, just buy it, okay? All right, now, what does my flood zone mean? Okay, so when it comes to flood zone A, like I said, it's kind of more hazardous, okay? Well, I'm gonna give you the real terms. Okay, so when it comes to, everyone lives in an area with a flood zone risk, okay? It's just a question of whether you live in a high risk, low risk, or moderate risk flood area, okay? High risk would be flood zone A. Moderate risk would be flood zone AE. Low risk would be flood zone X, okay? All right, so got that figured out. And also, don't freak out. If you want to back me up and learn more about what's going on, or not back me up, but see if I'm actually talking sense, I've linked everything in the show notes. So you can go check it out. The FEMA flood page and everything is there for you to check out and learn more. All right, now next. Another myth is you cannot build out the flood zone. Yes, you can. My dear, yes, you can. You can build out of the flood zone. And what does that mean? So why would someone want to build out of the flood zone? Well, you would want to build out of a flood zone because in order for you to get permitting to build a home, you have to build out of the flood zone. All new construction homes, this is something to look forward to, okay? If you're looking to buy a house and you're buying in this area and you're like, Michaela, I don't know what flood zone X is, I don't know where flood zone AE is. Here's the thing. If you buy new construction, they have built the house out of the flood zone, making it to where you're technically in flood zone X, okay? So you might be in the surrounding area flood zone AE, but your house is flood zone X, okay? So you technically wouldn't need flood insurance, but like I said, get that flood insurance because it's a low premium for flood zone X. Now, how do you get flood zone X if technically everything around you is flood zone AE? So the term is LOMA. So that's the short way of saying it. It's letter of map amendment. Remember when we were talking about the flood zone maps and the flood zone hazard and everything like that when it comes to the map? This is what the letter of map amendment means. So LOMA. A letter of map amendment is an official amendment by letter to an effective National Flood Insurance Program, MAP. A LOMA establishes a property's location in relation to a special flood hazard area, okay, which is what we talked about earlier. LOMAs are usually issued because a property has been inadvertently mapped as being in a floodplain, but is actually on natural high ground above base flood elevation. So that means that your house is built above base flood elevation, meaning you were technically built out of the flood zone. And you're like, well, if I'm built out of the flood zone, why would I still be considered flood zone X? Like I said at the beginning, everywhere in this area is considered a flood zone because of how our area is, the terrain. When you come to Baton Rouge and when you come to Louisiana, you will understand why it's like that. But anyway, so that is these are the 3 myths. So first, flood zone X is not a flood zone. Yes, it is. We've learned that. Yes. Second, flood zone means it floods. No. We've proved that wrong, like I said. Third, you can't build out of the flood zone. Yes, you can. You can do that with a LOMA, and if you ever wanted to build a house yourself, you could do that easily. I mean, that's the only way that you would be able to build. Unless you did, so other options, I'm going on a trail, but let's say you didn't want to build, okay? You didn't want to bring in that dirt work. You didn't want to have to bring all that stuff in. You could do a modular home, put it on pier and beam. Same, if you wanted to build a house and you didn't want to build up the dirt level, you could do pier and beam as well. Just stick like wood house on pier and beam. What is pier and beam? We'll get into that a later day, okay? But it's a raised house pretty much. And we'll talk about the details of what you use to raise a house and all those things like that. But that is the 3 myths of flood zones in Louisiana. So if you want to know more, you're terrified, did I scare you? I'm sorry if I did. Did not mean to, but if you have any questions about it and you're like, I don't know if Baton Rouge is for me, don't let it scare you. I live in, it's technically a flood zone AE and the water drains just fine, okay? Sometimes it's just the way it is here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So if you want to know more and if you're interested in more and knowing more, learning about Baton Rouge, you know the drill. Subscribe, hit that bell, and you'll get to know more of what's going on in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you soon, and hopefully you feel more educated about flood zones in Louisiana. Have a good one. Hey guys, welcome back to Living in Baton Rouge. I'm Michaela Covington, your host of this beautiful YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk